Take your Bibles and find Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, Matthew chapter 7, and 1 Samuel chapter 16. As I was telling you when I was a young Christian and God first started speaking to me, Cindy and we had some close friends who had just surrendered to the ministry, and they were going to Japan and to serve as missionaries. And that was the first thought that came to her mind. But we never know what God's going to say to us or where He might send us. We just have to learn to listen and do what He says. And so today, I want to talk to you about a familiar story from the Bible that most of you would know, probably all of you know about this story. It's the story of Zacchaeus. And what do you know about Zacchaeus? Zacchaeus was a wee little man. When I was a young boy, I was a wee little man, but that's changed now, right? You know, it's all changed. But it was. When I was a young boy, I was small, and so that means when I'm growing up, people made fun of me. And it was a part of life. Sometimes being small was a weakness. Sometimes it was a strength. Sometimes it was great. Sometimes it was terrible. Most likely, you all have something that at some time in your life someone made fun of you. You may have thought of it as a weakness. You may have thought of it as a strength. Sometimes we think if I could only change it, I would. You know, if there was something I could do about it, I would do something about it. Because being made fun of is not fun. It hurts. Nobody likes that, but we all have these things that make us different than other people. And usually we don't like those things. And so for Zacchaeus, that little poem probably wouldn't be a little poem that he liked. See, back in his day, he probably didn't like being a small, wee little man. The truth is, also, it's highly unlikely back then anybody would have wrote a little poem about Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus probably didn't have very many friends. Most people would not have even liked him. His family may not have liked him. Most people would have thought of Zacchaeus as sinful, wicked, and evil. And so we want to look at the story of Zacchaeus this morning from Luke chapter 19. And this is when Jesus again is near the end of his ministry. It's probably somewhere between January and March. And these last 3 months takes up a lot of space in your Bible because a lot of ministry happens during that time. It's an extremely busy time for Jesus and his disciples. And in that short period of time, Jesus will be trying to teach them many life lessons. And as we've talked before, disciples, that means learners. They were learners. But often when Jesus would speak, it would at first, it would just kind of go over their heads. And as we discussed, they were somewhat slow learners at times. And I don't know if that's a little discouraging, if it just, discouraged Jesus at all, or maybe it didn't. But time is short. And he is trying to teach them so much. And so today we find Jesus and his disciples, and they are on their way to Jerusalem. And they are going in there this final time. And it's Luke chapter 19. And we begin looking at the story in verse 1 when it says this: Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now, for the Israelites, Jericho was a very important place. This is where Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. It's where his fame began to grow, his popularity began to grow. And if you like to study Bible types are someone or something in the Old Testament that represents something in the New Testament. Joshua, he was an Old Testament Bible type of the New Testament Messiah. And so it's wonderful to see how those interconnect together. Now today we have Jesus. He's on his way into Jericho. Jericho would have been a great place to live, and so they are on their way into Jericho. Jesus is on mission to get to Jerusalem to complete his earthly work. And so verse 2, Jesus is passing through Jericho. Now behold, there was a man named Zacharias. Now Zacharias is a Hebrew name. It comes from the root Zacchus, and it means clean or pure. Clean or pure. Back in that day, names were really important. Parents would name their children certain names, maybe even hope this is what our child will grow up to be like. We just talked about Joshua. His name meant Yahweh is salvation. It meant to be saved. And so now we have Zacchaeus, and his name means clean or pure. Your name was really important. My name Glenn means valley. I don't reckon that's all that important. I don't know what that's all about. But Zacchaeus was clean or pure. And no one would have thought of him that way. No one looked at him that way. It was just the opposite. They would have thought evil, sinful, wicked. So there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector. Now we see the problem. Zacchaeus was a tax collector. And guess what? Nobody liked tax collectors. I mean, they were the worst of the worst. They were the worst sinners. You remember when Jesus would talk about, or the Bible talks about sinners, it would go sinners, and then it would put the worst, tax collectors. So Zacchaeus was a tax collector, but it was even worse than that. He was a chief tax collector. That likely means he was the best at it. He was really good at it. He was a leader among tax collectors. He probably made more money than the average tax collectors. And then you add to that Zacchaeus is also a Jew. That made him much worse. Because he was a Jew, he wasn't living up to his name. He was nowhere close to clean and pure. So there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. So he collected money from his own people to finance the corrupt Roman government, and he became wealthy doing this. The taxes that he collected were enormous. He could collect from his own people the Roman taxes, and then he could add for his own 25% or more. And it was such a heavy burden on people and their families, and he became rich, and it made it hard for everyone else, for all of his fellow Jewish citizens. It was a burden for them which was almost too much to bear. It was bad enough that we have to pay Roman taxes, but when people like Matthew and Zacchaeus come along and they are collecting money for Rome, that was even worse. So tax collectors were hated. And then on top of that, he is a chief tax collector. There is no love for Zacchaeus among his own people. But there's more. Verse 3. And he, Zacchaeus, sought to see who Jesus was. Now, today that's really unusual. There are not many who seek Jesus. If you are like Cindy and I, you drive a long way into church, most of the houses you drive by, they're probably not giving any thought to Jesus. They're probably not seeking any kind of Jesus or any kind of God. They're just taking care of themselves. There's no thought about Jesus. But you thought about it today. You came here seeking Jesus. That's why we're here. And you're hoping that maybe God will speak to you today, that God will work in your life. Well, I have a promise for you, and I want to show you that. Hold your place in Luke and go with me to Matthew chapter 7. If you came here this morning seeking Jesus, if you came here to learn more about Jesus, then here's a great promise for you. It's Matthew chapter 7 and verse 7, and here's what it says. Ask, and we should learn to do that. Ask. Ask, and it will be given to you. And then here we go. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. The Lord wants you to know who He is. He wants you to learn from Him. He wants you to deepen your relationship with Him. If you will seek, you will find. And again, maybe a majority of the people, they don't even care. They don't even desire to seek. But if you will find. God will speak to you. If you seek after Him, I'll promise you this, He'll find you. He will find you. Look, seek God, and you will grow. Now back to Luke chapter 19, verse 3. Look at what it says. And he, Zacchaeus, sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd. Boy, that's us today, right? We have so much crowding our life, and we just can't see. So, by this time in Jesus' life, in His public ministry, which has been going on for about 3.5 years, everybody has heard about Him. Everybody has heard about Jesus. They've heard about His sermons because His sermons are the most powerful sermons anyone ever heard preach. I mean, they said He preaches with great authority. They've heard about these miracles that He's done. They heard about how He could change water into wine, how He could make crippled people walk. He could make blind people see, deaf people hear. They probably heard about how He raised Lazarus from the grave, how He cast evil spirits out of people, how He could take a little boy's lunch and feed a whole crowd. I don't know, they maybe even heard about how He could walk on water. And so now, everywhere Jesus went, there was a crowd because people wanted to see Him, see what He would do, hear what He would say. And so here's Jesus and His disciples. They are coming through Jericho, and probably everyone who was able, every senior, every young couple, every teenager, every child, anyone that could get there, came to see Jesus. It was like the best parade ever as they come out to see Jesus. And so He sought to see Jesus, who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So Zacchaeus was a small man. He was a short man. And there are some disadvantages to being short. And it may have bothered Zacchaeus. I would think that it did at times. It bothered that he was a short man. And we know this. We know this about human nature. If there is something in you that you feel like is an inadequacy or something that other people look at you and it makes they think of it as an inadequacy, it can make you uncomfortable around other people. And sometimes because of that inadequacy, you look for ways, and I remember doing this as a little boy, you look for ways to compensate for being small or whatever your inadequacy is, or whatever you think your inadequacy is. You look for ways to compensate for that. You look for ways to make yourself look bigger because people are cruel. People can be mean at times. And often when somebody's being cruel about your inadequacy, just remember, they're doing that because they're trying to make themselves look bigger because of their inadequacy. Just trying to make themselves look good. And so we try to make up for these things in other areas of our life. And you can spend your whole life trying to compensate for what others may think is an inadequacy in you. So I could imagine that Zacchaeus would have done that same thing. It's possible that he even became a powerful tax collector to make up for what other people thought of as being small, short man. Because his position as a tax collector made him powerful. It gave him somewhat of control over other people's lives. In his eyes, it would have made him feel like a big deal. Now, of course, I don't know if that's what Zacchaeus was thinking. I don't know if that's why he became a tax collector. But maybe that's the way he thought. Fine, I'll show you, and I'll go to work for Rome, and they will pay me to take advantage of you. They'll pay me to take advantage of you. Because he was short. Sometimes people make fun of you. Hold your place in Luke chapter, whatever chapter we're in. When you're up here, your mind goes at 90 miles an hour. Hold your place in Luke and go to 1 Samuel chapter 16. I want to show you something that's absolutely wonderful. This is about Samuel, the prophet. His job is to go out and find Israel's new king. They need a new king. Saul has just bombed it. And so he's out looking for a new king, and he shows up, a fella by the name of Jesse, shows up at Jesse's house. And Jesse has all these sons, and Jesse is the father of David. We all know David would later become king. It's David of the David and Goliath. You know, it's that David. And so Samuel's at Jesse's house, and he begins looking over Jesse's sons, and he sees one of them, and he says, "That's it. He's the one. I mean, he is the one to me, Samuel. He looks like a king. And so he should be king." And then, this is what God says to him. 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 7. It says this, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance." So I'm thinking he had to be good looking, right? He was probably a good looking young fella. And then he says, "or look at the height of his stature." So he must have been tall. Well, Samuel looks at him and he sees good looking and he sees tall, and he goes, "That must be what a king looks like." That's what I think a king would look like. That would be my choice for the king. He's the one. But then God says to him, do not look at his appearance. It doesn't matter what he looks like, or at the height of his stature. It doesn't matter if he's short, tall, whatever it is, because I have refused him. And why did God refuse him? For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. You see, it's really not important to God at all whether you're short or tall. It doesn't matter whether we're good looking or not, and we're all good looking, so we don't have to worry about that, right? None of that matters. What you are on the outside, the shell that we live in, doesn't matter what it looks like. What God sees is what's going on in here. What's going on in your heart. It didn't matter to God whether Zacchaeus was a wee little man or a tree of a man. None of that mattered. All that mattered was what's going on the inside. And what God thinks is all that really matters. Okay? Now back to Luke. Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus, but he could not because he was too short. He was either too short or the crowd was too big, one way or another. But it was a problem. And it was a problem he sought to overcome. Luke chapter 19, verse 4. So he ran ahead, climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. Now, when I read that verse several years ago, the first thing I realized about that verse, and it's been a great life's application for me, and it's this. When you know where Jesus is going to be, you do whatever you need to do to be there. You do whatever you can to be there. Get past all the crowds of life. Get past whatever the obstacle is so that you can be there. And I always believe that's what we did. That's what we did to be here today. You could be somewhere else, right? How many of you wish you were somewhere else? Thank goodness nobody raised their hand. That was scary. Unless you did. Did anybody in the balcony raise their hand? I mean, we could. We could be anywhere. But we all came here to meet with Jesus. Do whatever you have to do to meet with Jesus. So Zacchaeus, he found his way to get around the crowd. Verse 5, and when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him. Seek and you will find. And Jesus found him. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So Jesus looks up, he sees Zacchaeus, he says, get out of the tree, come down, hurry, because Jesus was in a hurry. It's Passover time. And he wants to get into Jerusalem to celebrate Passover with his disciples, because he's going to teach them some great lessons at the Passover dinner. And so he's in somewhat of a hurry, and after the Passover dinner, he's going to the cross for you and me. What Jesus is about to do is really important, but he still has time for Zacchaeus. Verse 6, so he made haste, and he came down and received him joyfully. Now, I love that. He received him joyfully. You see, I don't believe Zacchaeus had very many friends, if he had any at all, other than maybe some other tax collectors. No one wanted to spend time with Zacchaeus. Most of them hated the sight. They hated it when they saw him coming toward them. They did not want to be around him. Now, I'm sure Zacchaeus had heard that Jesus spends time with sinners and tax collectors. Zacchaeus hears Jesus is coming to town. He went looking for Jesus. Jesus found him, and now Jesus wants to spend time with him. No wonder he received him joyfully. No one else wanted to have anything to do with him, but Jesus did. Jesus cared. You have this encounter with Jesus. When you have an encounter with Jesus, when I have an encounter with Jesus, it can change you forever. And I don't know how. There's so many different ways that you can have encounters with Jesus. You can do it with people. God puts people in your life every week, every day. There's so many ways that you can have encounters with Jesus, and when you do, it will change you and may change them. So it was a good day. Zacchaeus gets to see Jesus. He's found Jesus. You would think it's a good day for everybody, but it's not. Look at verse 7. But when they saw it, they would have been everyone else in the crowd. Those in the crowd who hated Zacchaeus. When they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. So as soon as Jesus tells Zacchaeus, I want to go to your house, it's like the crowd turns on Jesus. I mean, who would ever want to go to the house of a tax collector? Who would ever do anything like that? You know what I've discovered in life? Not everybody celebrates our relationship with Jesus. That bothers some people, that we have a relationship with Jesus. It bothers some people when you have an encounter with Jesus. I told you earlier I had a friend, and we watched him as he was selling everything in life so that he could move to Japan to tell them people about Jesus. And if they won someone to Jesus, do you know that family renounced them? Didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. Not everyone celebrates when we have an encounter with Jesus. Not everybody celebrates that, but I'll promise you this. If you have an encounter with Jesus, if you come to know Jesus as your Savior, when you deepen your walk with Jesus, we'll celebrate with you. It's important to us. Jesus doesn't care what the crowd thinks. He came to save. And so he tells Zacchaeus, get out of the tree. And Zacchaeus gets out of the tree. They go down and they have some type of conversation. I don't know if they made it all the way to his house or not. Possibly they did. But somewhere along the line they have this conversation. And then here's what Zacchaeus says. Verse 8. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor. And if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, and he did, he says, I restore fourfold. Now here's what we know about Zacchaeus. Something happened. Something happened in his heart that changed him immediately. I mean, it just took over him immediately. Something dramatically changed, where he goes, from now on, I'm giving half of what I make to the poor. And anybody that I have falsely taken from, I'm going to give it back to them fourfold. Zacchaeus has this encounter with Jesus, and it changed his heart. Zacchaeus had this encounter with Jesus, and it changed the way he thought. I remember that day. I remember that day where yesterday I knew that was a sin But today, I'm not going to be involved in it anymore. I'm not doing it anymore. I mean, it's so dramatic the way Jesus can change you. So what is it in this encounter that changed everything? Verse 9, and Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house. His encounter with Jesus led him to being saved, and it changed everything. Today salvation has come to his house because he is also of the son of Abraham. Might have been a little bit of jab at these people. See, no one would have ever considered Zacchaeus part of the family of Abraham. They thought of Zacchaeus as a traitor. But today Jesus tells them salvation came to his house, and not only that, he's part of Abraham's family just like you are. I mean, just think about what happened here. Jesus comes to Jericho. There's a crowd of people there, and in that crowd of people is Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus has this encounter with Jesus. And why did he have this encounter with Jesus? Well, verse 10 tells us, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. You see, Zacchaeus is why Jesus came to Jericho. Because Jesus came there to save him. That's why Jesus came to this earth. To save me. To save you. To change you. You read that time and time again, all through the Gospels. Again, this trip through Jericho wasn't because it's the fastest way to get to Jerusalem. It's because Jesus came to save Zacharias. And I hope that tells you just how much Jesus cares about you. And I don't know exactly how all that works with billions of people that live in this world, and no telling how many millions of people right at this moment are praying and seeking something for Jesus. And all of that, right this moment, you have his undivided attention. You do. If you will seek him, you will find him. So this morning, this moment that we have together, you have his attention. He's focused on you. So, how would you respond? Well, I think a good way is what we read out of Matthew. Ask, and it will be given. Sometimes you know why we don't ask? We don't think we'll get it. You know, sometimes we don't ask God, help me get through this trial. And it's like we suffered through it all along. Ask. At least ask. And ask again. And ask again. And ask again. Keep asking. Keep asking. Maybe you need to seek. If you seek, you will find. Or even better, he'll find you. He will find you. Knock. That's a good way of saying keep pursuing Jesus. Keep pursuing Jesus. Keep knocking, and it will be open to you. Just keep knocking and he'll open the door. So what do you need? How do you need to respond? Would you stand with me? All of us are very different. Your needs are different. Your thoughts are different. You have these things going on in your life. What do you need to seek God about? What do you need to knock about? What do you need to ask for? He's telling you to do it. You just need to do it. Maybe you're here today and you've made a decision for Christ and you just want to come and make it public. I'm going to be standing right here. If you want to come talk to me, I will. If you want me to pray for you, you come and I'll pray for you. Maybe you just need to come yourself and just get around the altar and just you and God, and you speak to Him. The great thing is, no matter what you need, God has His undivided attention focused on you. So you come as we sing.